Good morning, everybody. So my name is Thomas. I am the co-founder of Goal Sourcing, and I would like to welcome you guys to our fourth monthly webinar. Goal Sourcing is a social media website for procurement leaders and supply chain professionals. We provide you with relevant resources, news, and tools that you need to succeed at work. So in this webinar, we are going to discuss about the secret of successful category management, which is a strategic approach to procurement that often produce a greater results than traditional transactional-based purchasing methods. So before we start, I would like to ask everyone, except the speakers, to mute your microphone so that we have a pleasant webinar experience for the next 1 hour. To do that, just click on the microphone icon on the top left corner of your screen, or if you're calling in from your mobile phone or landline, just put your phone on mute. Thank you for your cooperation. That will ensure that we all of us have a pleasant experience in the next 1 hour. So this morning, we are very honored to have Mr. Edward Rayner with us again. Edward is a highly experienced and qualified business advisor whose expertise lies at the intersection of supply chain, business development, and organizational management. He has held senior roles in the natural resources, integrated services, and education sectors. His background includes working with Australian Trade Commission, Wally Parsons, United Arab Emirates University, and Spotless Group. So we also have Mr. Alan Rafiq as our speakers. Alan is currently a director at Market Dojo, a company offering e-sourcing solutions to companies within a range of industries such as Agrico, Bosch, and Specsavers. He started out working as a aeronautical engineer. Then he moved into procurement as a buyer, then senior buyer for Rolls-Royce. His next role combined the skills of engineering, buying, consultancy, and software sales to take a role with Van Digital as an account manager, selling and managing projects in the e-sourcing sector. So without further ado, let me welcome Edward as our first speakers. So Edward, are you ready?
Certainly am. Thank you, Thomas.
Okay, so please, I would like to welcome Edward as our first speakers, where he's going to share with you how to structure and communicate category management plans, including integration with all aspects of the business, with focus on the true value rather than the perfect contract. So, Edward, the stage is all yours.
Thank you. I'm based out of Melbourne in Australia, and over the last few years, I've had the pleasure of working with many different procurement organisations globally. Previously, I was working with the Chartered Institute of Purchasing and Supply, which I'm sure many of you could be familiar with. So, Thomas, when he asked me, we began discussing this webinar around category management, my mind took me back to many conferences I've been to over the years, where dozens and dozens of very experienced, very learned, very astute business people and academics would sit around tables and discuss category management. And I always remembered one occasion where there were 20 senior procurement leaders in the room, and these were CPOs of global brands, from the likes of Rio Tinto through to Walmart, through to large military organizations. And we asked the question, this is category management. 20 people in the room, and we asked them all to write down a response, and we got back 23 answers. So it's a really strong lesson that there is no one true textbook definition of what it is. That as soon as it enters into real application and through discussion or actually having to use it, it changes. So it's within that spirit that I've designed this presentation. I'll be talking through a case study where we're able to apply category management and providing you with access to some good resources which are out there, which can help you interpret this thing called category management into your world. And many of these concepts which we'll be discussing, I'm sure we can have a very rigorous debate about them, and perhaps at the end of the questions, following Alan's presentation, we can go into some of those areas. So this is how I see category management. I see it as being the entire discipline of procurement applied to a specific genre of spend. And the entire discipline of procurement is a wide beast. It encompasses many technical skills, many stakeholder management skills. When you apply it to a specific genre of spend, you can then start looking and reviewing its entire usage cycle within your organization. And just to be clear, it's not just expenditure segmentation. It's not just isolating a good or a service when it enters your organization. It's looking at how it integrates with the entire organization. And you need all of your toolkit that you have as procurement professionals or your team has in order to do good category management. A big believer that category management happens even if we don't call it category management. It might be very passive, and the outcomes might not be strong, but it still is being managed even if you don't know it's happening. I'll get into that in a bit more detail. I want to get straight into a case study as a way of showing some concepts and generating some discussion at the end. 2 years ago, I was involved with an aged care group in Australia, in Melbourne, a very large one. And just to clarify, these numbers I'm talking through, they're generically, they're slightly generic. The stakeholders were very happy with me presenting this, and I've done this in a couple of conferences. But I've changed the numbers. The ratios are correct, but just to protect some commercial integrity. So it's an aged care group with 800 residents with high-level aged care. So these are people at the end of their lives. And the incontinence product contract was up for renewal. The reason I've chosen this product, this category, is because it demonstrates, hopefully we'll see quite shortly, the integration of category management. It's also a product in the category where you don't need to have great technical expertise in this field in order to navigate through and understand. The contract itself over the last few years was worth, give or take, $500,000 Australian dollars per annum. Previously, it had only been measured on the cost of goods at entry. For me, working as a consultant, the brief initially was run a process in a competitive environment, find the 3 cheapest prices or the cheapest price and sign them up for a contract for delivery. But this was a contract, an area where I really felt we had an opportunity, also a need to treat it like a category, not just negotiate it as a commodity. And last comment there, the competitive products are relatively standard, and that's another reason I've chosen this. Within this field of incontinence products, the products, generally speaking, are quite similar in quality. It's quite a flat market like that. So these are things like nappies for adults when they're becoming incontinent. It's various bed sheets. It's various things that can help an elderly person towards the end when life is a little bit difficult. So my first step was winning the argument that it's a category, not a commodity. And this was just a simple definition I took to the stakeholders, the CFO, the CEO, and the nursing staff. I explained that category, something is a commodity, in my view, when it doesn't change how you operate or serve your customer, when it doesn't respond to your environment once it enters your business. You buy stationery, that's a commodity. The pencil doesn't change when it's in your business. And it's really easy to determine value price by volume. Whilst a category it has the ability to change how you provide services to your customers and how you operate. It responds to the environment once it's within your business, and its true value is determined by a multiple range of factors. And by going through this slide, which led a discussion with the key stakeholders, I was able to gain agreement that we should treat it like a category, and thus have a much more integrative approach from stakeholders, which we'll come to shortly, and how we measure the value, and that perhaps the outcome we're looking for isn't just a cheaper price per packet, isn't just a cheaper delivery rate. There's other things we can do with this which can have impact upon residents and make obviously our resident care of a much higher quality. So we started by being curious, and I mentioned earlier it's the entire discipline of procurement applied to a single genre of spend. And part of our procurement toolset is about being curious. So here are 3 questions. I just gathered the relevant stakeholders, pardon me, and I asked these questions. Who actually touches this product? And we were clear, it was nursing staff, it was personal care assistants, cleaning staff, and most importantly, the residents. And then to help us scope what we actually wanted the supplier to do, was ask these 2 questions. If we had no product, what would happen? And how would we know if the product failed? And we can see there quite clearly there's a range of things which will happen if the product fails or if we do not happen to have that product. And this piece of work, which I've condensed here quite closely, then enabled us to move to the next stage, which was the analysis. Simple slide. When we were able to determine that the impact of this category is visible through many different factors, we can look at laundry costs, we can look at time spent nursing each resident, pardon me. We can look at resident hydration and weight, which is measured, cleaning schedules, how many times one of the nursing staff has got to go and buy an emergency supply. And this is really where a category begins to take shape, that the total usage cycle of incontinence is felt, incontinence products, is felt at many other different points. And with this discussion, we got to a point with the key stakeholders when they realized value is to be measured and managed, and risk is to be measured and managed, not just at the commodity price of each packet of product that we purchase. There's other things we can do. Having analysed, we then needed to start telling the story. People were very reluctant, as I'm sure you've all come across, to getting involved in this, to start integrating. I needed to start telling a story that excited people who they wanted to be involved in the scoping, in the supplier selection stages, and also post-award in the contract management. This wasn't something where I wanted them just to go, our procurement have chosen this supplier, we've now got to work with them, or just wait for the contract and then start trying, as end users often do, negotiating their own services. I wanted them involved at the beginning. So we needed to tell a story that the outcome excited people. The story needs to be adjusted for the different areas, for the nursing directors, for the accountants, for the dietitians. And that involved a lot of sitting down one-on-one and showing how their particular discipline, their particular responsibility was affected by others through incontinence products. And lastly, we had a short list of suppliers. There's really only 4 main suppliers in this market in Australia. And I sat down with each one and as a group, and I showed them the range of impacts that they needed to have and manage in order to win the contract. And once the suppliers were seeing that we were treating this as a whole category, we weren't just looking at the price of the good, we were looking at the cost of how it impacted throughout the group, that total cycle of usage I mentioned earlier, and how we were applying so many different discipline points to this particular area of spend. Once the suppliers realized this, they then got excited. They wanted the contract, not just for the sales price, but they wanted to be part of this story of measuring the true impact of good continence management. So we told the story. I then had to develop people. Not everyone sees this world the same way as perhaps those from a procurement background, and everyone's got different skills. Certainly with nursing staff, their focus is always on the clinical side and patient care, which is where it should be. So I had to train them into start looking at other metrics. So we end up with nursing staff looking at, for example, cost of inventory management. We ended up with the people who look after the infantry, starting to consider hydration weights for residents. So we began having everyone at least having a base understanding of all the different metrics that we would be using to measure the value of this category. They didn't need to be experts, but they needed an understanding. And this next bit was quite controversial. I presented a similar discussion like this to the conference 2 weeks ago, and it caused great controversy. I worked with the shortlisted bidders to align their bids with the group's expectations and potential. I wanted this to be successful, and I wanted to make sure that the bids were as strong as they could be. From a governance point of view, we did not discuss pricing. This was purely on me looking at the first review of their bids and helping them understand what was going to be directly relevant to the stakeholders and what wasn't going to be. And so it meant that when we got through to the final presentations, the final bids, the bid teams were as focused on helping us expand and develop this category rather than trying to guess what they should be talking to. And from a governance point of view as well, I wasn't involved in creating scores or evaluating the bid. My role is to run the process, to create value through that. I didn't take part in evaluating through scores and bids. And we also looked at supply development. The questions we're asking them were, what innovations can we work towards together? And this was the important thing. How will the supplier work with other suppliers? Mentioned laundry earlier. So incontinence does affect your laundry. I wanted to create, and we did create, a stakeholder group which involved all the relevant suppliers. So as part of the bid team, we had a colleague from our laundry supplier involved as well, because it would directly impact their world. It was true integration, and the results were very, very successful. So we did choose someone. It wasn't a competitive bid, and so it wasn't just delivery of the product. We were able to increase education to employed staff and agency staff. This centre used 20 to 25% of their staff were temporary through agencies. So we had the successful continence provider going into the agency and providing those staff with education about best use of products and latest thoughts in the subject, so that when the agency staff turned up to work with us, they were on the same page. They knew how to use the products. They knew the same language, the same subject matter expertise. And so this meant that the resident received more consistent care. And that was part of the contract. And to do that, we had to get it off obviously everybody's agreement, but everybody had to understand we were approaching this as a category. We created a working group, including the nursing, dietitian, cleaning staff, to provide a review of the whole of cycle category. So what that means is the key stakeholders looked at it and reviewed contract performance, not just within their specific areas, but again back to those whole matrix. The supplier obviously was a key part of that. The supplier got involved in reviewing of prescription and skincare protocols, which within aged care is a new thing, actually having a supplier of a product coming in for meetings where nursing staff would be discussing how best to care for skin, how best to prescribe these products. It had never been done before, where the supplier would sit in the meeting, and it created enormous value because the supplier knows more about the product than we did. And the staff found it very, very helpful. And we also expected the supplier to manage trials of new products and techniques within our area. And we were able then to provide them with the impact upon other cost lines. So the impact. So let's get to the numbers. This one raised people's eyebrows. The supplier which we chose was actually the most expensive. The supplier we chose ended up increasing the direct cost of the good by about $50,000 per annum. So I had to go to the board and say, "Dear board, we recommend you sign this contract. Oh, by the way, it's going to be $50,000 a year more for incontinence products." However, By coming back to those matrices earlier, we saw that by having the education program, treating it like a whole category with all people involved, we decreased bed changes by 0.7 bed changes per resident per day. A main cost driver in aged care is how many times you have to change the bed. You change the bed, you need 2 or 3 staff members, you need a whole new set of linen. It's very expensive changing a bed. So the less times you have to change a bed because they're using incontinence products correctly, your costs decrease. We ended up with a reduction on skin wounds and care requirements. Again, using the correct product in the correct way, you have a better nursing outcome. That's costs coming out there. We ended up with a reduction in cleaning requirements by 20 minutes per resident per week, an increase in resident weight and hydration, which I won't go into too much detail here, how the healthier a resident is, the less cost it takes. So the overall reduction in the category cost was by about $200,000 to $280,000 per year. That's measured. And obviously we had the increase in quality of life, which is the most important thing in aged care. So even though we spent more money on a commodity level, on the category level, we were able to reduce significantly our expenditure and provide a higher quality of life. So the main things I want to pull from this case study, and again, hopefully by choosing this product, there's enough familiarity in there for people to follow the story. But if not, please contact me afterwards. I'd welcome any further questions. Someone once said to me that a good category manager is basically a mini CEO. You need to have these skills. We need to be curious. You need to be able to do analytics. You need to tell the story, develop people, and manage suppliers. Your skill base, if you can do these things, then you can start really driving categories and improving the quality of how they interact with your whole business. If you don't have these skills, you'll find, or within your team, you'll find it very difficult. In terms of process, as I mentioned earlier, I used to work with the Chartered Institute of Purchasing and Supply. Worked there for many years out of Melbourne. They've recently created a category management model, completely free. It's there. You don't have to be a member to access it. It's a very good basic approach to category management from an in-depth process point of view. And forgive me, I'm just going to switch over to it. So it's on their website, and you don't need to be a member to get this far. And they have a category management model, which, here we go. I'm not going to go into this in depth. We don't have the time. You will find out in the market consultants, you will find other models which look at category management. This is a good basic one which covers everything. And again, you can work out which fits the most important to you. They recommend 4 phases with 6 key activities, and they helpfully list within each of these steps key questions and a checklist of things you have to do. And the chances are, if you do all of these, your category plan will be in good shape. And I've used this several times as the checklist, as we can see there, and the template for how to start building your category. And I'll leave it to you to review and go through it at your own pace. Last thing I want to do is take up your morning and evening watching me read off the screen. But you can see that there's an awful lot of good, solid material in there, good things to check, which from a process point of view can certainly help you get a process in place to start reviewing categories so that you can integrate as much as possible. I'll head back to my presentation. I mentioned at the beginning, even if you're not doing anything, you've still got passive category management. It's still going on. It's just going on quite poorly. And this is a useful little list to see if you are being passively managing your category or whether you're actively doing it. if you start hearing things like that's an operational issue, not a procurement issue, we'll deal with that at the next tender. Well, the scope didn't include A, B, and C. The supplier says it's not their job. Those sorts of phrases, the chances are that it's being treated as a commodity within the organization. And if you feel it should be a category, then that's when you should start working towards that. How do you know if something's being actively managed? I believe if you see a documented plan, and it has to be documented, not just a shared understanding, but an actual document which is being constructed by procurement and business users. In the case study we looked at earlier, it was constructed with nursing staff, with cleaning staff, and myself as procurement. You should see a full lifecycle match which demonstrates every point in operations, the good touches. You should be able to measure the impact, not just the cost of entry, the cost of purchase, but you should be able to measure the impact. And there should be one person accountable for category performance over a 2 to 3 year cycle. Doesn't have to be procurement, can be operations, but somebody has to be accountable for managing this group of people who interact with it. So that takes us to the end of, I think my time is up, and hopefully through this I've shown a relatively simple case study with some good outcomes. I've pointed you in a direction of good, solid practice in terms of process. I've given an overview of the type of skill set and the type of mindset which heads towards category management. There certainly hasn't been the comprehensive, definitive discussion of it, but I hope in the questions, if there are things which particularly haven't covered yet, please bring them up, and I'll do my best to answer them. And whilst you get a copy of this, I'm more than happy to take any further questions offline through either my phone number or by email.
Thank you, Edward, for the very insightful sharing. So for those, actually, I like your presentation a lot, especially you put it like category manager is a mini CEO. I think that's very good and logic, and I kind of like it. But again, thank you for your sharing.
Okay.
For those who just joined in, we have a Q&A session at the end of the session. So after our next speaker, so if you can just mute your microphone by clicking on the mic icon on the top left corner, that will ensure that we have the best experience in the next 30 minutes. All right. And for those who would like to contact Edward, the numbers and his email is appearing on the screen, so you can jot it down. Or we will also send you the recorded webinar after the webinar in the next few days, and so that you can get in touch with him if you have any inquiries or any question regarding category management. So for that, I would like to welcome our next speakers, Mr. Alan. So Mr. Alan is going to present to you the Sherlock Holmes in sourcing. And I think he has a very interesting case study today, where he wants to show you how his company identified opportunity across 46 spend categories and compare them in a single unified view. I think this is going to be a very interesting case study and a very useful presentation for all of us. So, Alan, please take the stage.
Hi everyone. Thank you very much for the introduction and great presentation from Edward there. I thought it was very interesting listening to comparing commodities versus categories there and how you manage it. So the presentation, short presentation I have for you today is I'm just going to get so I can see the screen better. If you do 2 seconds. Is on opportunity analysis. So my name is Alan Rafiq I'm a co-founder for Market Dojo, and we essentially have tools to help procurement professionals. We originally started with easy to use software as a service for e-auctions, and since 2010 we've developed that capability into SaaS software to cover a range of areas from supplier onboarding, innovation, e-sourcing, and category strategy or opportunity analysis. So what I'd like to talk about today is what one of our clients have been using our tools for, but which could be done obviously on just a generic process in terms of working out on their budgets and what they want to use for the various categories. So what we have here is the challenges in building your plan, a typical approach taken, and a case study. Now, what we're talking about at the moment is not really category management here, it's opportunity analysis. And those of you who are involved in companies and want to look at building your plan, then there are a lot of questions on how this is done. Soon after starting Market Dojo, we engaged with a company called Housing 21, who's a social and care home provider, and we had a new FD there and a new procurement director. And the procurement director really wanted to know how they plan their categories, how they plan their budgets. A typical kind of process is people kind of sit round in a room, and maybe with the buyers, maybe without the buyers. Maybe the FD has said, I need to save this amount of money. And essentially, you end up with, this is what we're going to save this year, and this is kind of the rough plan on how to do it. And how that plan is obtained varies between different companies, different people, different organizations. Some companies will take a more rigorous approach than others. I think the challenge faced by a lot of these companies is really having a consistent approach between the various category managers or buyers to arrive at a budget figure for the year and a strategy which is both realistic and has been formed consistently. So you can see in this little diagram here, the FD says we need to save 3% this year, and somehow a miracle occurs, and the procurement director says, yeah, we're going to save 3% this year. And I think the FD that we were working with wanted a bit more rigor around it to be able to say to the FD, actually, no, we could save 6% this year, or actually we could save 2% this year, and if you want the extra 1%, you're going to have find some more resource. So if we look at the kind of challenges that people face when building their plan, you've got a variety of levels of organization and kind of how they work out their categories or what they buy. And a lot of companies might not know exactly what they buy, might not have the information, might not have the data. They might not realize how the category has been purchased in the past because, a buyer, for example, has left the organization. You'd be surprised how many organizations don't know what contracts they have. A lot of companies might have a disorganized approach or finite resources. And so when you're looking at, an organization with a spend, to work out what you're going to do in building that plan in a consistent and organized fashion, which has some science behind it, can actually be quite a challenge, especially if you've got a new procurement director joining the organization. So what would you do? Well, we'd normally recommend, and a lot of organizations do this to a greater or lesser degree, to hold a workshop with the buyers in the organization around your categories and try to work out some basic information. And we've got where we started with this, as I mentioned, we started out with pay-as-you-go e-auctions and e-sourcing, and we moved on to kind of opportunity analysis. And opportunity analysis is really a gap between your spend analysis and your sourcing activities. In other words, it's taking your data from your categories and looking at really what you're going to do with the categories to work out what sourcing activities you're going to achieve. I mean, we started with, I'm just going to show you, we've got the spreadsheet which is available on our website actually for free. And you can see here that all we're talking about really is for each category. And when we say category, I'm talking about kind of a sourcing opportunity within a category, so a tender opportunity. So if your category is built down into several subcategories, and each of those subcategories would be a tender, that's where you'd approach this activity. And if you're looking at each of those kind of subcategories or tenders, as it were, you really want to look at things like, what's the definition of the category, what's the market liquidity, what's the savings potential, what kind of timescales are you talking about? And it's really about assessing each of your tender activities or categories in a consistent manner and scoring them against each other, so you can come up with a consistent approach between all the buyers about which strategy you're going to use to tackle your opportunities. So what we'd recommend is doing this opportunity analysis. You'd kind of sit down in an organization with all your buyers, and you'd go through this kind of rigorous list of understanding each category and working out what the opportunity is to working out how you're going to tackle that, such as, how accurate are the specifications, how many products or subservice categories are there in the category, what's your annual spend, how many incumbents do you have, how many participants do you think would take part in tendering your activity, when did you last negotiate, and this helps you understand the current contracts, it helps you list supplier facing categories, helps decide on your key criteria, and prioritize based on those criteria. So in the example of Housing 21, the procurement director joined the organization. He had some buyers who'd been there for a long time, some new buyers. He had no real data on the categories and no real understanding about how he was going to approach them in the future. So what they did, we have got a tool called Category Dojo, which is does the same type of thing as you can do in the workshop. It just does it in a maybe slightly more fun way. But what he did was he analysed the 46 categories or subcategories around, what kind of spend, what kind of budget, what kind of contract length they have, to gain the basic information. And from that, using our tool, as I mentioned, you could do this via spreadsheets as well. Looked at trying to compare the various categories against each other. So you compare, for example, the readiness for tendering against competition for supply, and work out which categories would be the most suitable for an auction. And that's the most basic form of it. What he went on to do was look at the savings opportunity by categories, and we do it via empirical analysis by looking at when it was last tendered, how it was last tendered, how many suppliers were involved, how many suppliers are in the market, how difficult the category is. As I mentioned, you could do this quite easily with a kind of a spreadsheet and scoring criteria. I think the key thing here is you take a consistent approach to comparing each of the categories to understand the opportunity and how you're going to move forward with the strategy. We also looked at prioritizing the categories, and we did that by weighting various criteria. What was the most important to the procurement director at Housing 21? Was it to pick the easiest categories, the ones with the biggest savings, one with the quickest to implement, to come up with an overall strategy, which you have to compare against your resource plan to work out what you're going to do in the current year. We also looked at things such as, the Kraljic matrix to look at spend against risk, and also look at it from the supplier side. It's all very well saying, well, this is a strategic category, but if the view from the incumbent is like you're a bit of a pain, that determines a different strategy to if the incumbent sees you as the holy grail of all customers. So, in essence, the summary of it is, if you're going to look at your category strategy and your opportunities, what we'd recommend is you look at it in a consistent manner, probably via a workshop with all the buyers. Look at, understanding what the key criteria are, judging each category or subcategory or tender against each of those specific criteria, and then work out a robust and organized approach on how you're going to move forward. So when the FD says, what savings you're going to achieve this year, you can say it with, a level of understanding and rigor, and you can determine, well, if you want more than this, then it's going to be this many more resources. And so it gives a bit more science to it, rather than, you need to achieve this much this year. Okay, we'll do it, as it were. Which is, very similar to like in a sales organization where they say, well, you need to grow by 1 million, but you haven't got the sales resource to do it. Well, you're going to have to recruit more sales resource, for example. And that's essentially how opportunity analysis can be tackled on quite a large scale with some science. And I hope and I have not overrun or anything. There we go, Thomas. I hope that was okay.
Yep. So again, leave your slide there because all your contact information are there. So for those people who like to get in touch with Alan, his contact number, email address is on the screen showing right now. So take your time to jot down the number or even the email address. Well, thank you, Alan, for the very impressive presentation. And I must say, I mean, even though I'm not a category manager myself, but from the gist of it, the way I see this, you make the information so well. Category management, I think one of the challenges is always overloading information, and you make all this information so easy to digest. I guess that's the core value proposition of your tools, right?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of challenges around just understanding the basic information on the categories, and when you start holding a workshop with buyers or procurement directors, and you get into just the basic information on each category, and I'm not talking just about spend data. I'm talking about when was it last negotiated, how was it last negotiated,
Contract data.
Contract data. A lot of companies don't have that readily at hand, and unless you don't capture that information as well, and unless you do that, to work out a plan moving forward is rather challenging. So I think there's a part of this opportunity analysis which I've discussed in working out what the opportunity is. Actually, the data collection in itself is just as important.
Right. Okay. Well, I have more questions, but I think I'm sure we have audience who are waiting to ask questions to our speakers. So, yep, we still have about 15 minutes before we conclude the session. So it's actually questions time. I also have several questions from our offline audience. So this is time, guys, for you to unmute your microphone or phone. If you have any questions, just briefly introduce yourself, your company, and mention the speaker to us, and then you can state the question to us. So, guys, any question?
Hello, Thomas. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, it's Colin McIntyre here from Lane Procurement. How are you?
Hi, Colin. Good to hear from you again.
Hey, no problem. I've just got a question for Edward. I'm actually teaching category management for the CIPS Advanced Diploma stage just now, so it's come at a really good time. We've just started the module, but my question is, what I'm trying to simplify things down as much as possible, but there's a lot of the basic procurement cycle in there, looking at the 6 category management model. But what I see is it's just a matter of debate. Is it basically the simple procurement model with elements of total quality management thrown in?
Edward, you heard that?
Okay, I did. So the question is just to make sure I've got questions. Just the basic elements of procurement with a total quality management approach. I think that's another useful way of. I think it's another useful way of looking at it, which would suit some industries more than others. Certainly in the construction and resource game, I think that's bang on. Without getting too in depth on this one, the SIPS curriculum, they do have a subject on category management, the new one. And I think that's how they navigate it as well. They start bringing the discipline of management. I think that's fair call.
Yeah, I'm not pushing my opinion at all. Yeah. It's just I've studied quite a lot of quality concepts in the past, and there's a lot in there. It's basically everyone's involved. You mentioned the touching points of the product being led from the top. All of this collaboration I see a lot of in category management model as well.
I think it comes down to, I mean, people in this forum are purists almost, and we can talk about these things and get good value from that. But when as soon as you're in front of a CFO or the head of operations or director of nursing or whoever, it's about what's the one line which gets them to understand what it is. And I think that's where procurement traditionally has struggled. We do sometimes get a bit too philosophical with other stakeholders.
Yeah.
So I really like that definition there you had of the quality management aspect.
Yeah. I did like your point, Edward, with how to actually sell it. You mentioned the one-liner there, and I totally agree with you. Procurement needs to learn how to sell a lot better. They've been used to purchasing, they've been used to buying. I think they need more sales training in that aspect, so I totally agree with you.
Some of the best procurement people I've come across have come from sales backgrounds.
I've heard that too.
The profession do have sales backgrounds. Yeah, maybe that's subject for another discussion, perhaps.
Okay, well, I hope that answered your question, Colin.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. Thanks, Edward.
Okay, well, thanks for joining. If you have any question, you can still ask later on. So, let's take for another question from the floor again. Anybody? Otherwise, I will have another question coming up. Okay, well, let me ask a question from our offline audience. The first one that returned to me yesterday. So his name is Fuad, and he called himself consultant in a company, Nafta, Egypt. And he basically has two questions. He didn't specifically mention which speaker to it, so maybe I will address it to Alan first, all right? So he has three questions. So he said, what is the best steps for choosing products for category management? Second question is, where and when we implement market surveys in the process of category management? And number third one, I guess that relates to the middle of your presentation, Alan, later on. How do we relate supply chain to category management?
Wow. Okay. So the first question I think was around what are the best tools for category management?
Actually, the first question is like, what is the best step for choosing product for category management? Maybe you can share some of your past case studies, right? What is the best step for choosing product? Or does like Market Dojo already have a prescribed steps that is implemented as part of the tool? Yeah.
So I mean, it's steps for. I mean, the best steps for choosing tools for category management. I mean,
choosing products for category management. Well, that's what he said.
Okay. In terms of which products you're going to category manage, is that the correct? Is that what you're referring to?
Well, I think from his question, I interpreted that way. So let's assume he asked it that way. Yeah.
I mean, I think you should manage your entire spend in a particular way. It's interesting that the discussion previously around commodities versus categories. But let's just say you split all your spend into categories. I mean, I think you should manage them all. I guess the question is really around how do you prioritize your time and which particular categories or subcategories you're going to spend your to develop. And I think that depends on what you want to get out of the year. I mean, if you're basically looking at savings, then you're going to have a heavy focus on the quick wins. But if you're looking for kind of a more long-term approach, then you need to evaluate each category with that in mind and look at like a 3 or 5 year plan instead of a 1 year plan.
Right. And his second question is like, where and when we implement market survey in. Yeah, Edward, go ahead.
If I could really just, the process I use is I look at products which have a high complexity and a high value. I do a 4-box model, one side's complexity is one side's value, and those which have got high complexity, high value, they become strategic, and they get the focus before those which have got low complexity and low value.
Okay, useful tip. Okay, so his second question is like, where and when we implement market survey in the process of category management. Alan, you want to take that question, or Edward?
Ed would go first if you like.
Okay, well, Edward, do you mind?
Where we do market surveys, so I'm assuming they were talking about our supply market surveys.
Yeah.
For me, very early on, once you've defined what it is, actually, even before defining what it is you're looking for, once you've got a loose generic thing, the more information you can get about what your supply market is doing, the better. The more access you've got to their innovations, the better. The more awareness you've got of trends in the market and what is achievable, the better. So I'd say as early as possible.
Right. Yeah, and his third question might be a bit more vague. He says, how to relate supply chain to category management? Well, I guess maybe he's trying to convince his boss on like how to use category management in relation to like supply chain management, I guess.
Yeah. Just on the earlier point on the second point you made there on the question, yeah. In terms of the kind of questionnaires, I guess it also, I mean, I'd completely agree with Edward there, as early on as possible. Although there, we have it does depend on the complexity and supply base of the category. Sometimes we have clients who will engage with them very early on. But other times, in terms of that kind of survey, but other times what they might do is try to whittle down some of the complexity in the supply base first before kind of tackling it with questionnaires. So it all depends on the workload and resource as well. So I just thought I'd add that there.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, to relate it to the tool offered by Market Dojo, is there any specific features or specific functionality that will help them to conduct these surveys, like supply market surveys, better?
Not so much. I mean, our tool, and I say our tool is just a tool. It could be done via a workshop. Is about identifying the opportunities and working out, depending on what criteria you want, which opportunities you're gonna tackle first. I think that's the main. And I think then when you move forward with actually the category, then as Edward mentioned, it's nice to get as much information up front. But what you might find yourself is that actually there's a horrendous number of suppliers that makes that process slightly unmanageable. You may want to whittle it down first and then go out with more in-depth surveys a bit later to minimize the workload. And so that really comes a bit later. Okay.
Well, good answer. So the third one, how to relate supply chain management to category management?
I think perhaps the only way of addressing this within this sort of forum would be if your supply chain is outsourced, then I think you can really treat it as a separate category. If you're working with a 3PL or even a 4PL provider who does your supply chain for you, then you're in good shape to treat it as a category. The more of the supply chain you do yourself, it becomes far more, I think, complex to deal with in this sort of environment. Those would be my initial thoughts on this.
Anything to add, Ellen?
I think it's a very very difficult question. I mean, it depends on also your bounds and definition of where your category management kind of falls. I mean, I think as we discussed before, everyone calls category management slightly different things, and so it depends on how also the resource and how in depth you want to get into the category management of the supply chain. It might encompass.
Okay, good answer. So before I move on to the next question from the offline audience, anybody who wants to ask questions, so please just unmute your microphone and just briefly introduce yourself, your company, and mention the speaker to ask. Any questions? Hello? Okay, well, in that case, let me pull up the second question from the offline audience. So this is Robert. So Robert is actually he says, purchasing and operation director from UK. So it's someone close to you, Ellen. He says, what factors do you consider important for world-class category management? Well, I think that is that's quite a broad answers, but maybe we can share with Robert a few tips, like what are the key factors that is considered important for a world-class category management team.
Again, another complex question. If you break it down to people, process, and technology, if your process is world class, then it might be handy if you've got some sort of certification to support that, and there's different bodies out there that supports the certification. If you've got well-trained people, qualified people, then you know you're more towards world class. And on the technology side, perhaps I'll leave Alan to discuss that in more detail. But yeah, how do you demonstrate it? It's through that would be my starting spot. Not that having qualification necessarily means you're great, but it's a good indicator that as a team, as a function, if you take it seriously, you're taking professionalism seriously.
Okay. Alan, do you have anything to add for this question?
But I mean, it's a very good point from Edward there as well. I mean, the people are the key for any organisation, and I'm a massive process fan. And I think, however deep your category management goes, if you have rigorous processes for each part, then you make it scalable and you make it easy when you have new people join the organisation. In terms of technology, all I'd say for technology for the kind of category management process is make the technology simple to use and easy to adopt, and then get people to want to use it rather than have to use it. And if that's combined with the process, then it makes it all very scalable, and it means that moving forward, you've got a very kind of future-proofed way of carrying out category management. If you make category management complex and difficult with cumbersome tools, you'll find yourself always fighting to make sure you get the kind of proper category management done.
Right. Okay. Well, Ella, I have another question that's specifically coming up for you. So this lady, Elliot, she's a technical director. He didn't mention his company, but she's based in Singapore. She said, I like your tool. I visited your website, but I'm just curious. I mean, our company policy doesn't allow us to use any cloud solution. Does Market Dojo have any enterprise hosting, as in on-site hosting solution?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I mean, the way of the world today is that everyone's moving on into the cloud. It makes it easier for people to access it. It makes it easier for organizations, and it makes it more cost effective for everyone. So on-premise applications is something which we don't do, and we've kind of resisted. And I think you need to. There are security questions. You need to look at what level of data you're putting into the tool, and what level of security that's required for that. We have a lot of companies such as Greco or Bosch who use our tool, and I think you just need to weigh up what's going on within the tool to the security implications of that. I mean, obviously some secure government areas, etc., might need some high levels of security. But you've got to ask yourself again, when you go out to tender, for example, a lot of companies use email for tender, and then when they discuss with a cloud platform, they say, well, you need to have, this cloud platform might not be secure enough for us, and yet on the other hand, they're sending out all the tenders via email. So again, you need to weigh it against what you're currently doing. However, if the long shot is they like Category Dojo, they can't use our tool, what I would suggest is we've got a nice resource section of our website, and on that it's all free, and there's a lovely spreadsheet in there which are the kind of questions and rigor used for opportunity analysis. And I guess Category Dojo as a tool is a very easy tool, but it's just a simple method of consistently analysing your categories against one another. And if you like that method, but you're unable to use an online tool, what I would suggest is, well, have a load of questions, maybe look at the spreadsheet on our website, and develop your own plan for way for analysing your categories in a workshop with all your buyers to capture that information and manage it on an ongoing basis.
Okay. I hope that kind of answers the question from Elliot. Thanks for the great answers, Alan. I mean, I totally agree with you. I come from the IT management background, and sometimes I know. I mean, people are using email. It's already on the cloud, but at the same time, they are worried and they are skeptical about using cloud solution for other enterprise software. I think that's what you're trying to say, right?
Yeah, I mean it's a very justifiable kind of questioning in companies' minds about using online tools, and sometimes we do get drawn within a debate saying, well, it's a SaaS tool, how, what level of security do you have? And when you get more and more into it, you realise that actually the current processes are far less secure than what they're looking at for the online tools, and sometimes it is just a bit of sometimes people are scared about the online tools, and actually they're a lot more secure than the processes which are currently being used. Obviously, having an on-premise application does offer a different level of security, not necessarily better, I may add, but different. But the trouble about an on-premise solution is for providers who supply these solutions. I mean, the current solutions on the market, who've been on-premise in the past, the providers have found it's very difficult to manage, to roll out updates. They've had inconsistency between clients, and ultimately it's a high-price solution because of all the different company sites they need to maintain and difficulty with rolling out updates. So SaaS for cloud is definitely the way forward. I think the questions around security just need to be managed.
Right.
And that's simply the result of it. I think in terms of, if you look at all the large providers, they're all moving towards SaaS because otherwise you simply can't compete.
Okay. Well, like I said, I mean, Miss Elliot, I mean, I guess if she has any further question, she will contact you directly after the webinar when she hear your answer for that. Well, we have the last question, and this question, I think, this guy, I think it's Mr. Rustam. So he said he's a manager for a company called NBK in Qatar. So he said, Edward, should a category strategy link with your business strategy? And if so, how can we give the organizational context when pitching the strategy to our management? Well, I think it's more about convincing the board to adopt category strategy, right? Yeah.
The first part of that question is yes. If it's not aligned with your business strategy, then you're in all sorts of trouble. But the other question of how do you get them on board? How do you it's as always, it's putting on your listening hat. It's not trying to ambush them. It's not trying to wow them with detail. It's just sitting there and having a straight business peer-to-peer conversation where you say, I'd like to treat this category as a strategic. It's important to us. I think there's more we can do with it. And I think we can have a bigger impact on the overall success of our business through treating this as a category. Back to the case study, I sat down with the board and I said, incontinence products aren't just about buying packets of things. It has a direct impact on the health of our residents. I think we can do more. I think we can do better. And that was enough for to get their involvement. And yes, they were rigorous. And just because people sometimes make the mistake of, once you've got approval or involvement, that gives you permission to do anything. Far from it. They need to be with you every step of the way, and that's sometimes where it falls down. So my simple advice would be: sit down, listen, explain your vision of that you can do better and it needs to be done better, and keep them part of the journey. Stakeholder management in 32 seconds. But no, good luck with that.
Good answer, Edward. Good answer. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. So, well, again, I mean, I think for Edward, Alan, I have more questions. I will email it to you guys after the webinar so that you can give them the answers, and we will forward the answers to our offline audience respectively. So, well, again, thanks, Edward. Thanks, Alan, for the time for joining us. Just for you guys, for your information, Edward is also our featured expert in our Ask the Procurement Expert forum. So if you have further questions, I mean, feel free to click on the link in our email that we will send to you shortly. Edward is featured in our expert panel, so you can ask him any questions. For that, I would like to conclude the webinar for today. If you guys like our webinar and you would like to follow us in the future, our events, our articles, our resources, just go to gosourcing.com/subscribe to subscribe to our newsletter. Or you could also go to linkedin.com/gosourcing and follow us to stay in touch with us for our future events and updates. For that, I would like to adjourn this webinar for today. So again, Edward, Ellen, thanks for your time. Thanks for your support. Let's stay in touch for our future events.
Pleasure.
Right, thanks very much.